It's a single thread running now. I've just commented the second thread, and let's see what is the issue. So it might have, okay, it has finished running, but if you would see, the URL did not launch. Now the reason for that is it's using the driver object, okay, but that driver object is null. The reason being, over here you have created the object of browser factory, okay. So on this object you are initiating the browser, okay. Now this object is not visible to my Google search class. Now my browser is there in the memory, it has got some hash code, and but as soon as I come to launch URL, though this Google search is extending browser factory, driver would be null because it's a global variable over here, and when it is extending it, the driver will be null. It doesn't have a value, right? Because we are not using that. The driver object has been created on the instance of browser factory class, okay. Now the better approach would have been to create the instance of Google search and then initiate the browser. Now I can comment this line. Now it would work. Now why this would work? Because I have created an object of Google search class. I am initiating the browser on the same object, and therefore this object will always have visibility to driver. So it will have its driver and you can launch a URL now. Let's just test that. So guys, this is all the concepts related to memory. Okay, I can make a video on memory model, like how classes are stored. So this is how it is. Now it has started working. So once you are following this approach, right? So that's what I meant. If you are extending a class, a browser factory class, you have to be careful while creating the objects and on which object you are invoking your methods. Okay. Oh, how can I avoid this issue, right? So let's say if I have now, this is just one single class. I will have like around 100 to maybe 500 or 600 classes. Now, should every class be extending browser factory? That's not a good design pattern. What we're going to do it is, now our issue is just about the creating the objects. Like once I create the object of browser factory, once I initialize WebDriver, the same WebDriver should be passed throughout. Okay. So the better thing would be just to have getters and setters on that, right? And avoid creating object of this class. Because the moment somebody creates object of browser factory, your driver would lose the reference to that WebDriver, and it will have a new instance of driver which will be null. Or maybe if you're calling setup driver again, it will be initialized to a new instance of WebDriver, but you will lose your reference to old one. Now for that we have singleton structure. The first thing that we will do in singleton structure is make a private constructor. Now you will notice, guys, as soon as I just say private browser factory, I'll get some errors. Let's see where are the errors. So here we anyways commented that. Now the error is in Google search. Now we have lost the visibility to browser factory. This class is private now. If I need to, so this is how I control access to this class. Now I am not allowed to create a object of this class, but how do I pass the instance of this class, right? And that too, I have to ensure there is only a single instance passed. For that, let's just create a global variable of type browser factory and name it as instance. Okay, and in here let's create a public method, public browser factory get instance. What I'm going to check is, whenever somebody creates the object of this class, if the instance already exists in the memory, you pass on the same instance, else you create a new one. So instance would be new browser factory, right? So whenever I call this get instance method. Now definitely I cannot create the object of this class. I cannot instantiate this class, but I will get the object using get instance. Now it is creating the object of this class and returning me that instance of the object. Okay. Now this has to be static as well, guys, so that it is moved out of the class scope. And similarly, your instance object should also be static. Now it is at a memory, at a static or a heap memory, right, wherein it is just a single variable, right, and it is a single instance that has been stored in the memory. Now from wherever in the framework, if you need instance of WebDriver, all you have to do is just call the get instance method and use the WebDriver of WebDriver object on which was created on this instance to start with. Let's just cover that as well. In Google search, let me just delete this now. Rather than driver.get, I'm just going to get the instance of the class. You can create a constructor. That's a better way actually. So whenever you, that's my default constructor. So all the initialization ideally we should do inside the constructor. I would say browser factory instance, let it be like that. And I would say instance is equal to browser factory dot get instance. Okay. Now on this instance, I need to get my WebDriver. All right. So my WebDriver I have created over here. Right? And this is what it is returning me. Driver is equal to launch Chrome driver. So let's just do now over here instance dot driver dot get this thing. And since now it's not Google search, so over here as well I have to use my browser factory class only, because I cannot get instance of the WebDriver from any other class now. Instance is equal to browser factory dot get instance. So over here it will also return the same instance. And now you can say instance dot initiate browser. And okay, if we deleted that, but we need that as well. So bear with me sometime, guys. We will just some sort of beautify this code. But right now I'm just covering the threading concept. Let's save it now and let's run it now. It's just a single thread running for now. You will have problem in this approach also. I'll just show it to you when you move to a multi-threaded prime environment. So it's doing the same thing, but now I have decoupled the entire mechanism of reading the WebDriver. Now that being done, let's just improvise this class further. So what I'm going to do is now, rather than keeping this as initiate browser, let's just, so this is my driver object. Let's just create some getters and setters so that it looks more relevant. I'll just name my initiate browser to set browser, and I'll create another method which will be get browser. So I'm just going to say public WebDriver get browser, or get driver, or yeah, let's just say get driver or set browser, get browser, anything. This will basically return me this dot driver. Okay. Now let's just change this everywhere. It's my set browser. Now this guy is just to give it more relevant, just to, so that if somebody comes and read your code, they don't, get confused on what things are doing. Now I have a browser factory class and I have two methods. One is setting the browser and one is getting the browser. Over here I have just set the browser, and in here I need not use directly the driver object. I can just say get browser dot get this thing. Now the reason I'm doing is, if there is some further checks that you have to do for the browser inside browser factory, you can use these two methods, right? Now no matter what, your entire framework will be calling get browser in order to get the same instance of the browser. So if you have to perform any function later on WebDriver, you can do inside this method. So you have only two methods from where you can set your browser and you can get your browser in the entire framework. So that is how the beneficial is singleton structure. Now in other approach, you have seen the challenges where you are extending your browser factory. That's a really loosely, not loosely coupled, it's like very tightly coupled framework and not advisable as well. Okay. Now that was on sorry, single thread. Now as soon as I change it to some multi-threaded thing, right? Now let's just talk about thread 2 as well. So for one thread, so far so good. It works perfectly well. Now let's just run it in a multi-threaded environment and see whether we have the desired output or not. What basically it should do, launch two Chrome browsers and then launch a URL gmail.com. Let's see. Okay, I have two Chrome instances, one over here, one over here. But if you will notice, it has logged, it has, gmail.com is being hit only on one browser instance. And the reason for that is this thread and this threads are confused now. Now why they are confused is because we are calling our set browser over here on this variable. Now this variable, which is driver variable, is a global variable. Now the problem, not the problem. In fact, all your global or field variables or instance variables of a class, they are shared between the threads. Okay, only local variables have a separate copy in each thread. Okay, the instance variables, the static variables, or the field variables, global variables, whatever name you give to this, right? So this is my global variable, and this is that. Then over here I have a static variable. So for these two variables, simultaneously multiple threads will be accessing it. Now what's happening over here is once you start this thread, it comes into this method, right? And it initializes your browser. Let's say T1 initializes the set browsers on that. Here this driver object, it is busy with thread 1, right? Though you cannot control it whether T1 or T2 access this this global variable. So now when T1 is interacting with driver, right, T2 won't be allowed to interact with the same browser. So that's what a thread lock is, right? So either you have to make it synchronous, right, which will again give you more trouble in terms of your performance, because if you are in a multi-threaded environment, if you synchronize your driver itself, it means until one thread loses the hold of driver, the other thread cannot execute, and you really don't want to do that. So how do we avoid such situations? So that is where thread local comes into picture. Now if you define a variable as thread local, it will not be shared between threads. Okay, it will move to a memory, let's say a thread local memory, wherein every thread will have its own copy of that variable. Now in here, you have created a global variable and you need it globally, right? You cannot make it local variable. What you can do is just define driver as a thread local. So how do you define? It's just that add thread local over here. Okay, and initializes to a new thread local. You can do inside this constructor as well. Now I wouldn't be having a driver variable. I'll have a web driver, which will be a thread local web driver. Okay, every thread will have its own copy of web driver. Okay, but also I would like to mention over here, own copy doesn't means like the copy will change. Right? If T1 has a copy of web driver, it will maintain the same copy throughout your execution of the framework. Now in our case, it will be two copies of WebDriver, one with T1 and one with T2. Okay, so in order to access this now, so in set browser, I have to use driver dot set now, because thread local has a method set. Now using set method, it actually now driver object is pointing to my web driver, right? If you see, this set method is from ThreadLocal class, ThreadLocal.java class. Okay. Now, in order to get the web driver, I have to use the driver.get. Now, this get method is again of ThreadLocal. Okay, you set the web driver using ThreadLocal, and then you get the web driver using ThreadLocal. Okay. Now, still it would work, but now you will see Gmail will open up in both the browsers. Let's just run it. So this is how you actually create your own multi-threaded environment, right? I've covered why not to use extend and how you change your entire structure to a singleton structure. Let's just see now. So see over here, Gmail has opened up in here, and if I see the second instance, again both have gmail.com, the URLs. So now your multi-threaded environment is ready, right? From here, let's just start on how you arrange your entire framework. Okay, how you control the other variables which has to be put into thread local, right? And this is how your framework structure would be. So in on this singleton structure, we will be building the entire framework now. Okay? The common utilities, the common methods that we need, and Selenium implementation. Okay, let's do it now.